God does not kill. I know that statement makes very many people uncomfortable, especially Christians. Immediately, our mind runs to the Old Testament and we start thinking about the flood, the firstborns of Egypt, the earth opening up and swallowing Korah, Sodom and Gomorrah. And most of you will point to those events to discredit the truth that God does not kill. And some of you will even ask me, Ian, are you saying the Bible is lying? Are you saying the Bible is wrong? No, I'm not saying that. I am saying most of us are reading the Bible without the key. You are reading the Old Testament as a flat historical book instead of reading it as a progressive unveiling that leads to Jesus Christ. Because at the end of the day, the Old Testament was speaking concerning Jesus. It was supposed to point you to Jesus Christ. Here's the radical truth for day 31. Jesus Christ is the only perfect theology. Take that or leave it. If you want to know God's nature, if you want to know God's character, if you want to know God's will, you don't look at a plague in Egypt. You look at the life of Jesus here on earth, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And when I look at Jesus, instead of seeing a God who kills, I see a God who dies for his enemies and those who hate him. So the question is, so why did the Old Testament writers say that God killed? To understand that, we have to go back in time and jump into the cultural context of Israel. Israel did not live in a vacuum. They were immersed in the culture of the ancient Near East. The mindset and the thinking of an Israelite would be more familiar and more similar with that one of an Egyptian and a Babylonian and a Mesopotamian than it would be similar to yours. Your 21st century mindset, your cognitive environment, as the scholars call it, cannot be similar or even familiar to you than it was to the Babylonian. And that is why you will find when you study, some people say that there are some accounts and stories that they find in the texts of the Babylonians that they later find in the Bible, bearing in mind that those texts of the Babylonians and the Egyptians were written before the text of Israel. And so they make the wrong conclusion that the writers of the Bible were only copying stories of the Babylonians and the Egyptians, which is actually wrong. What that proves is the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, and the Israelites had the same cognitive environment. They viewed the world the same way. And for example, a major event like the flood is recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the Babylonian Bible, for lack of a better word, in almost a similar way like the account in Genesis. It does not mean that Moses copied the Epic of Gilgamesh. No. It just means that this was a major event that was covered by different people, different religions, different views, but all of them in the same cultural setting. All of them have a similar cognitive environment. They have a similar cultural context. So let me give